Okay, creation versus evolution. We're looking about the ivory discovered on the planet from prehistoric, so-called, elephants, mammoths, mastodons. What does that point to? Millions and millions of years, or worldwide flood, recent creation? Well, let's go back to K41. Still have my cold, trying desperately to get rid of it. I'm going to have to bring divorce proceedings on it now. It's come back 4 times. Well, everybody in San Diego seems to get it periodically. Be glad when the flu season is over with. Too old for this. Anyway, K41. What we wanted to look for is a certain amount of ivory. We left off with all the amounts of ivory. R.F. Flint says, perhaps a little less restrained estimation of the character of these deposits may be gleaned from the following. A certain amount of ivory is furnished by the vast stores of remains of prehistoric animals still existing throughout Russia, principally Siberia. There's that cough. In the neighborhood of the Lena and other rivers discharging into the Arctic Ocean. The mammoth and mastodon seem to at one time to have been common over the whole surface of the globe. In England, tusks have been dug up, for instance, at Dungeness, as long as 12 feet and weighing 200 pounds. Those are large animals. The Siberian deposits have been worked for nearly 2 centuries. The store appears to be as inexhaustible as a coal field. Wow. Some think that a day may come when the spread of civilization may cause the utter disappearance of the elephant in Africa, and that it will be to these deposits that we may have to turn as the only source of animal ivory. The Encyclopedia Britannica. The Arctic islands north of Siberia have been described as even more densely packed with the remains of elephants and other mammals. So they must have been land connected, as well as dense tangles of fossil trees and other plants, so much that the entire islands seem to be composed of organic debris. No wonder these things have fostered tales of great catastrophes. Not evolution. Something killed them all at once. The wonder is that uniformitarians could possibly offer any other explanation in any seriousness. There is most certainly no modern parallel entombment of elephants or any other kind of mammal taking place anywhere in the modern world. It may not be clear as yet whether these deposits were made directly during the Deluge period or soon after, or both, but it seems fairly evident that the extermination of such immense hordes of animals and their interment in what has ever since been frozen soil will somehow be explained in terms of the events accompanying just such a universal aqueous catastrophe as the Bible describes. No consideration is made. They just ignore the idea of the possibility of a catastrophic worldwide flood. It has occasionally been suggested that the ocean waters would have remained warm for too long a period to allow for the preservation of the soft parts of the animals. Had to be frozen quickly. The inference being that they must have perished in some other catastrophe centuries later. However, it is doubtful that post-Diluvian Siberian climates could ever have supported such vast hordes of animals. The animals that perished in the flood did not, of course, have to float around on the Arctic Ocean for months. They would have disintegrated, but were quickly buried in the depositional silts of the floodwaters, right where they lived in a milder pre-flood climate. The entrapped waters in these sediments, cut off from the warm waters of the ocean, the open ocean, froze rapidly, forming the permafrost, the permanently frozen soils and subsoils of the Arctic lands in Siberia, and it was in these that the mammals and other animals of the region were buried. Charlesworth says the frozen mammoths are found on the timbered banks of rivers and in the soil that nearly always contains fragments of trees. Bacterial decay was hindered by the cold climate and by quick interment in fine silts. On the other hand, most of the animals which were drowned in the flood worldwide did suffer decay, and thus may have been exposed for some time prior to burial, so we don't have much of them to look for as fossils. Putrefaction, however, seems to have started immediately after the animal's death and before burial, despite the small precipitation of the time. Also, many mammoths and mastodons certainly lived during the first centuries after the flood as well, before finally becoming extinct or modified to their present forms by a genetic variation within the species. So we see elephants today, but they're modified. Evidently, the climate changed. The concentration of oxygen and the flora that were able to grow so well in the pre-flood period now was reduced. The size of the elephants were reduced also as well. They couldn't grow up and be as large and have as much ability because of the lack of oxygen. Animals grew much larger because of 30% approximately more oxygen in the atmosphere, as contained in the ice canopy and protected from ultraviolet radiation from the sun. Here's a remarkable study of the Arctic phenomena, attributes them to violent catastrophes associated with the shifting of the Earth's crust. Convulsions postulated by Amon Sanderson in his theory make our visualization of the deluge quite uniformitarian by comparison. Pardon me while I blow my nose. Okay. Am I ready? A sudden mass extrusion of dust and gases would cause the formation of monstrous animals of amounts of rain and snow. And it might have been even so heavy as to cut out sunlight altogether for days, weeks, months, or even years, if the crustal movements continued. Winds beyond anything known today would be whipped up. Cold fronts of vast lengths would be built up with violent extremes of temperature on either side. There would be 40 days and 40 nights of snow in one place, continent-wide floods. In another, and roaring hurricanes and seaquakes and earthquakes, bringing on landslides and tidal waves and others, and many other disturbances. As soon as you have the opportunity for extremes of weather all over the planet at different times and different kinds, it immediately happens. Catastrophic worldwide flood is followed by catastrophic weather. Sanderson again, riddle of the frozen giants. Sanderson attributes the quick freezing of these mammoths that have been preserved whole to the descent of great blobs of chilled volcanic gases, which first shot up towards the stratosphere, then rapidly falling and expelling the ground violently outward radially. Others were overcome by the intense winds and floods. Their bones commingled with hosts of other animals, as now found in Alaska and other places. Mass killing by all kinds of natural things, but in catastrophic form. This is exactly the state of affairs we find in Alaska, for the mammoths and other animals, with one or two significant exceptions. They were all literally torn to pieces while still fresh. Young and old alike were cast about, mangled, and then frozen. There are also, however, other areas where the animals are mangled but hadn't had time to decompose before being frozen, and still others where they decomposed down to bones and were then either frozen or not. But beyond these again, there are similar vast masses of animals, including whole families of herds all piled together in gullies and riverbeds and other holes, but where only bones remain. You can't explain all of these together that are so varied by uniformitarianism. All kinds of catastrophic sudden events of different types occurred at the same time. Wow. Sanderson is a field zoologist and author of numerous volumes on wildlife. He goes on to say, it is interesting that the same author 13 years previously had written on the same subject, and at that time it followed the usual uniformitarian viewpoint that the mammoths had fallen into holes and gulches or had drowned in river floods, why, just stretching it, and that the reason for their extinction was a low birth rate. Wow. Further study, however, convinced him that such explanations were wholly inadequate, ridiculous, and he has been driven to the geologically heretical concept, oh boy, see, it's a belief system, evolution, of catastrophism as the necessary answer. Rather than to return to biblical catastrophism, however, there's a little twist here. He wrote, the biblical theory that the deluge was the agency by which these animals were killed was in due course demolished by simple logic and modern rationalization. Wow. He has sought a naturalistic explanation in terms of Hapgood's recent shifting crust theory, previously referred to. Twist and turn, twist and turn. Simple logic and modern rationalization. Have you actually investigated a worldwide catastrophe possibility, never mind associating with the Bible? The greatest riddle, however, is why and how did all these assorted creatures, and in such absolutely countless numbers, get killed, mashed up, and frozen into this horrific indecency? We submit that the answer to the riddle can most be found in terms of the Genesis flood. Not entertained by him at all. And now begins another aftermath of the deluge of tremendous significance. As the modern cycle of evaporation, atmospheric turbulence, and vapor transportation, and condensation and precipitation became established, snow began to fall, possibly for the first time in Earth's history. As we have already seen, there is strong evidence that the climate of the entire world prior to the flood was uniformly mild and pleasant. This snow, falling primarily in the Arctic and Antarctic regions, was of course derived from the hydraulic cycle from the waters, which only recently were covering the Earth. Great amounts of snow were also accumulated in the mountains, which had just been uplifted. In this way, large amounts of water were removed from the oceans and stored in the polar regions in the form of great ice caps, which in some instances are believed by glacial geologists to have attained the immense size of continental ice sheets, thousands of feet thick and thousands of square miles in area. This agency thus combined with the agency of orogeny, mountain range forming, to cause the retreat of the globe encircling waters off the continents. I say glove there, should have been Globe. Glacial geologists have never answered the cogent criticisms of Sir Henry Haworth, president of the Archaeological Institute of Great Britain. Near the close of the 19th century, he wrote, he amassed a tremendous amount of evidence that most of the supposed ice sheet deposits may have been formed by a great flood sweeping down from the north. Maybe it was worldwide. See especially his works, The Glacial Nightmare and the Flood, and Ice or Water, both published in London by Sampson Low back in 1905. We're all the way back there. Oh, we don't want to look at these ancient books. The guy made a lot of sense. Haworth was not defending Genesis, in which he was not a believer, but only was concerned to show the scientific inadequacy of the glacial theory. See? Just look at it objectively. It is perhaps illuminating to record the experience of one of the authors several years ago in the library of the University of Minnesota's outstanding Department of Geology. Haworth's massive work, Ice or Water, was found on the shelves and was borrowed for study. First time in the 40 years of its residence there that it had ever been checked out, or judging from the numerous page pairs, still not cut apart from each other, or even open, as evidence that the Ice Age constitutes a catastrophe that is utterly inexplicable in terms of present processes. One need only recall again the fact that there are dozens of hypotheses that have been advanced attempting to explain its cause and mechanism, and all have had grave defects, and none has yet been generally accepted. On the other hand, the biblical deluge offers an eminently satisfactory explanation. The combined effect of the uplift of the continents and mountain chains and the removal of the protective ice canopy around the earth could hardly have failed to induce great snow and ice accumulations in the mountains and on the land, and the land areas that are